Alan Hirsch, founder of 100 Movements and Forge and 5Q, and essentially founder of Everything Missional. Thank you so much for joining me this morning.
It's a joy to be with you again, Ben. Been a long time.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Alan, we'll jump right in. What does genuine community look like to you?
Well, I was pondering this whole idea. I think it's very hard to get beyond the idea, what you see in Acts 2, that kind of fellowship there, where they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, fellowship, sharing meals, experiencing a deep sense of awe and wonder at what God was doing, miraculous signs and wonders, meeting together in one place, sharing everything they had. And then, the people being added to the church. It's very hard to kind of get beyond that as a really dynamic expression of community. It's kind of marked by generosity of spirit. The word sharing comes up in that passage quite a lot. And I love the idea of the community in awe and wonder, or a deep sense of awe of God, but also wonder at miracles and experiencing miracles. And I think a community and sharing and that thing is kind of the context in which miracles are likely to take place. This is what you might call Pentecostal fellowship. It's the time of Pentecost, right, when the Spirit came upon the people of God. But another way of, I've always been stimulated by Leslie Newbegin's kind of definition of community, but the best evidence for the gospel is a community that lives by it. Kind of where the community is a bit of heaven on earth, right? It's a little taste, a scratch and smell experience, I see a little bit of Jesus here, So I think that kind of idea of a community that gathers around Jesus, and that therefore is a group of disciples committed to becoming more and more like him. I think that's what, for me, community is about.
That's a beautiful picture. I've heard you talk about the difference in what's commonly called community and then kind of communitas, which is something deeper and richer. Is what you described, is that communitas as God intended?
Yes, it's certainly an expression of it. Communitas, it's a funny term, but it distinguishes from our ordinary experience of fellowship. Communitas is a form of community that gathers in the context of an ordeal, a challenge, danger, disorientation, kind of like what we're experiencing now. We're in liminal conditions now, that's liminality. That could, if all the conditions are right, bring together a group of people that meet together, as a comradeship, a kind of a daring group of people who commit themselves to each other. A sports team is a good example of this, but, people in the rescue and fire departments experience that, where in the military, I guess, is there too. Everyday life experiences this, but there's a bonding. And I think that's very much a mark of communities that can change the world, is adventure, integrated risk, not risk averse, but engaging risk, and being developed and grown in that time, yeah.
And then there's obviously the greatest adventure, the greatest risk and death to self, and beautiful picture of togetherness that we find in Christ and in his greatest communitas. And yet it's so hard. You're in Melbourne today. You spend a lot of time in the States, and you see the church in the Western world. You speak into the church in the Western world. What's the hardest part of creating that actual communitas, community as God intended?
Well, I think it's a costly thing, right? Community calls us out of our individualism, for one. By very definition, we have to recognize that we can't do this alone, and we are called out of our self-secure kind of situation where we live according to our own interests, and that's costly. I don't know if this means anything about him. I'm an Enneagram 5, and I'm an introvert. So living in community, which I've always done. I've always committed to this. We've always lived together with other people in our home ever since we were married. And in fact, the last couple of years was the only time when we haven't. So the 2 years in New York City prior to coming back to Melbourne, We didn't live with other people, but it was New York City, so we had people all around us, you know. But it's costly, but also it's beautiful. You know, it's there's something, a gift that it brings us, you know, that you can't get by any other means. And so, yeah, I think you've got to give yourself to something, and you learn how to love and to be loved in return. And I think that's risky and dangerous and beautiful at the same time.
Yeah, that is beautiful. We were talking just before we started recording just about some of the division and difficulty, and as we come out of COVID, whatever coming out of COVID looks like, it looks different in Melbourne today than in Texas, than wherever folks are watching from. What's your hope for the church? And that's your church, and then also I know you have a huge heart for the global church. What's your hope as it relates to community?
Yeah, well, you know, it's the big challenge of COVID. I mean, and this is going to be a particular challenge because needing to self-isolate has meant that we don't touch each other, and we're not allowed to be with each other in larger groups, but even in small groups in some cases where we're completely locked down. And I think that the danger there, Ben, is that we're going to experience that as a habit. You know, that it doesn't take long for communities or people to develop deep habits of isolation, and I think it's going to be quite a challenge bringing us back together. And but I think the challenge is, and this is the good side of the equation, if there's a good side of it, is I think what COVID has done is, while it's put pressure on the larger gatherings, it's also rewarded smaller, more relational aspects of church. So I actually see this as a time where what we're now calling the micro-church or missional community, whatever you want to call it, it's a time to discover the dynamics of neighborhood church that is networked. It's a movement moment, in my opinion, if we will grasp it. But I think things are going to change, and they are, and I don't think they're going to go back to normal. I really, really don't think so. I think people are dreaming if they think it is, because the digital cat is out the bag, and people, you know, who used to being consumers in much of our churches now don't even have to go to church on Sundays. They don't have to get in the car. They can stay at home and flip pancakes while watching, 10,000, 50,000 different possible kinds of church services. That's not good. That's changed everything. And I think whether we like it or not. So, but I think it's a challenge. I think the challenge is to discover rich relationships in the local community. I'd love to see a church on every street, where a group of Christians can gather together on, if it's Sunday mornings, be it Sunday mornings, where they can do like we read in the book of Acts,
Yeah. No,
live life together.
That is one of my hopes and prayers. We even, in a field guide for genuine community, address the idea.
Great book. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. You're very kind. You said some kind words in it. I quoted you a couple times in it because you're far wiser than I am. But we talk about how easy it is to live a digital life and how we can hide so much and how that creates the facade. And so that is part of our hope, is to help folks move from facade to family, and especially in this time as we come out of a year of isolation, to not return to normal, but to return to something far more great.
We have to model that way, don't we, Ben? We've got a few of us have got to come together and show people how it might look post-COVID. That's authentic, so it becomes critical for people to take a dive, dive into community, give it a shot, and see what happens.
Yeah. God, would you create that desire in us, and would you help us by the power of your Spirit? Alan, thank you. Thank you for your consistent voice of wisdom. Thank you for holding and calling the church to something more than it is. Thank you for your work with Movement Leaders Collective and the multiple resources. I think your name's on half the books in my shelf behind me, and I'm incredibly grateful for you, friend.
Thanks, brother. It's awesome. It's such a gift to be in people's lives like that. I never take it lightly. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day for you. I'll have a good evening, and we'll see you soon.
Peace and mercy.